The Retrogasmic podcast is brought to you by Rosemary.nz, a one-woman business that designs and makes beautiful hot rod, rock and roll and Kiwiana themed men's shirts. Hop on to Rosemary.nz and see the vast selection of fabric choices and designs. That's Rosemary.nz.
We interrupt this program to give you a bulletin just received from one of our naval units at sea. A large object traveling at supersonic speed is headed over the North Atlantic.
Once a normal, voluptuously beautiful woman, she drove into a nightmare of horror and saw descending from the sky.
Just a minute, ladies and gentlemen. I think something is happening.
Ooh, I feel retrogasmic.
Retrogasmic. Retrogasmic. With Dee Deluxe.
Welcome to another show. I'm Dee Deluxe and you are listening to the Retrogasmic podcast. We're going to kick off with this little clip to give you a hint on what we've got in store for you today.
Stand by for action. We are about to launch Stingray. Anything can happen in the next half hour.
Anything can happen in the next half hour. Indeed, it can. That was, of course, the phenomenal intro music to the TV series Stingray. Today we're going to be looking at the work and the lives of Gerry and Sylvia Anderson, inventors of Supermarionation, which most of you will know as the puppet-based science fiction TV series which kind of ruled the airways throughout the 60s and the 70s, and if you count Terrorhawks, the early 80s.
I went to a building school. I was very good at plastering, and I was going to be a studio plasterer. But I suppose, fortunately, the lime burnt my arms. I lost the skin on both arms, and my doctor said, there's no way you can be a plasterer. And so I had to become a film producer instead.
So Gerry Anderson was almost a plasterer. If you hadn't had that terrible allergy to the lime in the plaster, we would never have had Thunderbirds and Captain Scarlet and Joe 90 and all those great shows. His first show was in the late 50s, 57, 58, and was called The Adventures of Twizzle. And it was a series for young children about a doll with the ability to twizzle his arms and legs to greater length. Yep, that was a show. It was Anderson's first work with puppets and the start of his long and successful collaborations with puppeteer Christine Glanville, special effects genius Derek Meddings, and composer-arranger Barry Gray. Anderson followed this up with the second commissioned show, which was Torchy the Battery Boy. It depicted the adventures of a boy doll who had a battery inside him and a lamp in his head. And his master, Mr. Bumbledrop, who was voiced by the wonderful Kenneth Connor, the Carry On film star. It was a bit of an odd show. He would kind of take off in a rocket at the beginning of each show, and stuff would happen, but it was neither science fiction nor a kind of preschool show, bit oddly placed. It did okay, but it wasn't massively successful.
Ooh, I feel retrogasmic.
During the filming of Twizzle, Anderson started an affair with secretary Sylvia Tham, and this ultimately led to him leaving his wife and children. Once the dust had settled, Sylvia and Gerry got married and she became Sylvia Anderson, and the great partnership was born. So the original puppets for Twizzle were papier-mâché heads, and they were basically just hanging on one string and worked by the puppeteers in front of a painted background. But he was continually trying to make things more realistic and do what he always wanted to do, which was basically make films.
I started shooting puppets like one would shoot live action, three-sided sets. The operators were working overhead from the bridge so that they didn't stand behind a plane backing. And I was really trying to say to the industry, look, I can make live action films. And what did they say? They said, doesn't this guy make good puppet films? Let's give him some more. And I just got typecast and trapped.
The next show that Gerry and his team were involved in was called Four Feather Falls, and it was produced by Granada Television and based on an idea by Barry Gray, who was the composer and orchestral man, and he also wrote all the show's music and went on to do lots of music for the other shows as well. This was the first series to use an early version of Anderson's Supermarionation puppetry, which had the moving mouths and the more realistic kind of look and feel. There was 39 13-minute episodes produced. I think it was the end of the 1960, early 1961, and it was set in a fictional Kansas town of Four Feather Falls. Tex Tucker was the sheriff. He was given 4 feathers by an Indian chief, and it allowed his guns to kind of swivel and fire on their own without being touched when he was in danger, and he could speak to his horse and his dog. So it's another kind of kids show and not really sci-fi. And again, it did okay, but it didn't tear up any trees.
Supercar, with beauty and grace, fast as can be. Watch it flying through the air. It travels in space or under the sea, and it can journey anywhere. Supercar, it travels on land or roams the skies through the heavens' mighty rage. It's Mercury man, and everyone cries. It's the marvel of the age. Supercar. Supercar, it travels on land or roams the skies through the heavens' mighty range. It's Mercury man, and everyone cries. It's the marvel of the age. Supercar.
I love a good theme song that's got a whistling solo in it. Can't beat it. Supercar, that was their kind of first proper science fiction show. They made 39 episodes between 1961 and 1962, and it was the Anderson team's kind of first proper sci-fi show. Gerry Anderson always had a problem with the way the puppets walked. He absolutely hated it, in fact. So basing a series around a car meant that the lead character could be largely sitting down most of the time, which is kind of clever. And it's also got the first time we see the classic Gerry Anderson launch scene. Every single show he did, Captain Scarlet, Fireball XL5, Thunderbirds, they all had the classic scene where the doors or the hidden space would open and the rockets would fire and the ship or the craft would take off, and it became a real Gerry Anderson kind of thing. The vocalist on the Supercar theme tune was a guy called Mike Samms of the Mike Samms Singers. They did lots of stuff. They did the Stingray theme, of course, but they also featured on Tom Jones's Green Green Grass of Home and Delilah, Tears by Ken Dodd, a handful of songs by Tommy Steele, and Walking Back to Happiness with Helen Shapiro. They were kind of the go-to middle-of-the-road, close harmony singing group back then. They also provided the vocal hits on the theme tune to The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, the famous spaghetti western by Ennio Morricone. If you can picture it, you can hear the ooh ah bits. And that was them. So if you sit down any real Thunderbirds or Stingray fan and ask them who the genius behind the shows were, sure, people will say Gerry or Sylvia Anderson, but quite often you'll hear the name Derek Meddings mentioned. He was the model designer and the special effects guru that basically made the whole thing come to life.
Thunderbirds are go!
It was one of those exciting series for me because it involved a lot of miniature effects, and the only way the film could, or the series could be actually put over, was to put in a lot of effects, miniature effects, with the Thunderbirds flying and crashing and the various things they did.
Of the 4 film stages used for shooting Thunderbirds, 2 are for the special effects department under the inventive control of director Derek Meddings.
How do you evolve the futuristic designs of your models?
Well, usually I just start doodling on a pad, and whatever happens, that's usually what we get.
I really was given freedom. I could do anything I wanted to, really, as long as it sort of didn't mess up the story. And Thunderbird 2, I think, was probably, as far as I'm concerned, was one of the most successful vehicles in the series. And people often ask me, how did I come up with the ideas for these various craft? I used to look through a lot of magazines on aircraft and vehicles, and you can't help sometimes from, like stealing. If you see a vehicle and it's got really good tracks on it, like a tank, you think, well, I'll incorporate that into the vehicle and I'll put wheels on it. It was like the pink Rolls-Royce. When I had to design this Rolls-Royce, I was trying to think of a way of making it different. And the only thing I could come up with was that it had 4 wheels on the front and just 2 on the back. And all I really did was reverse the sort of chassis of a lorry. It was not done for any technical or any reason that it would hold the road better. It was just for its appearance. I used to sit down in the evenings and I'd start with a blank piece of paper and I would just doodle until I came up with a shape which I thought was pleasing and also that it looked good when it was flying. And then, of course, the problem, having designed all these craft, I was then responsible for doing the effects and making them fly.
And so another scene in the adventures of international rescue is shot at the AP Film Studios in Slough.
When we started off, we did the first one, which was the aircraft in danger coming into land. That particular sequence I thought was really very ambitious, probably one of the most ambitious ones we did. The reason for that was that you've got this aircraft coming in and you're following it, and it's got to land on these 3 strange little vehicles. And these vehicles were controlled by wires. And occasionally, of course, the wires would break and the vehicle would go hurtling out of picture because the road was running this way and the front wires would break and it would go screaming back out of picture. And we had this happen on one occasion right in the middle of this quite exciting sequence. So I had to, it looked so good that I had to devise a method or a way of losing this particular vehicle.
fire flash, overshoot.
We did a cutting shot and we saw it careering off the edge of the runway and crashing into another parked aeroplane and blowing up.
Sorry, Scott. Radio fault again in number 3 control system.
Something else that we did, we had these little Jetex motors that we used to put in underneath and light the fuse, and somebody used to just put a little layer of dust on the roller road. And if you look at the series now, you'll see that every vehicle, doesn't matter what road it drives down, there's a great cloud of dust behind it, even in a main street.
Well, an absolute legend. So let's have some music. This is another song written by the very talented Barry Gray, and this was actually quite a big hit as a pop song in the UK when it was first released. This is the theme music from Fireball XL5.
I wish I was a spaceman, the fastest guy alive. I'd fly you around the universe in Fireball XL5. Way out in space together, conquerors of the sky. My heart would be a fireball, a fireball. Every time I gazed into your starry eyes. We take the path to Jupiter, and maybe very soon we cruise along the Milky Way and land upon the moon. To a wonderland of stardust, we'd zoom our way to Mars. My heart would be a fireball, a fireball, 'cause you would be my Venus of the stars. But though I'm not a spaceman, famous and renowned, I'm just a guy that's down to earth with both feet on the ground. It's all imagination, I'll never reach the skies. My heart is still a fireball, a fireball. Every time I gaze into your starry eyes. Fireball, fireball. Every time I gaze into your starry eyes. Fireball, fireball. Every time I gaze.
So Fireball XL5, it ran for one series. I think there was 39 episodes, all shot on a 35mm black and white film. It was shown in the States and was only ran for one series, even though it was quite successful. From then on, Gerry and Sylvia moved to colour. Everything they made was in colour. So Fireball XL5 was set between the years 2062 and 2063, which I always thought was very specific considering it was set so far in the future, and featured the adventures of Fireball XL5, the spaceship commanded by Colonel Steve Zodiac of the World Space Patrol. The crew included the lovely Dr. Venus, who was Doctor of Space Medicine. I'm not quite sure how that's any different from normal medicine, but obviously it's medicine in space, I guess. The navigator and engineer, Professor Matthew Matic, yeah, and the co-pilot that was a kind of fairly average robot who used to kind of say, "On our way home," all the time, and that was pretty much it. That was the only character or regular character in an Anderson series that was actually voiced by Gerry. He used one of those artificial larynx that you often see if people have had throat cancer or something like that, and it basically works on a microphone and a vibration system. One of the coolest things about Fireball XL5 was the fact that they managed to do the space science fiction thing, but without making any effort whatsoever to be kind of realistic. Viewers were informed that the ship's rocket motors were powered by a Newtomic reactor, and that XL5 could travel safely at speeds of up to space velocity 7, which enabled it to reach the outlying star systems within a few months. The crew never wore spacesuits, and instead they took oxygen pills, which is very handy because if you're putting a space helmet on a puppet, you can't put a string on its head. Yeah, it was light-hearted, but it was good fun. Recommended.
Marina, Aquamarina, what are these strange enchantments that start whenever you're near? Marina, Aquamarina, why can't you whisper the words that my heart is longing to hear? Your magic to me, a beautiful mystery. I'm certain to fall, I know, because you enthrall me so. Marina, Aquamarina, why don't you say that you'll always stay close to my heart? Marina, Aquamarina, why don't you say that you'll always stay close to my
Troy Tempest, his loyal lieutenant Phones, and of course the beautiful Aquamarina, who somehow managed to breathe underwater and swim just by flicking her tiny wooden feet, even though her absolutely huge head was almost as big as her entire body. We're talking about Stingray, of course, made in 1964 for £1 million. Entirely in colour, the first British TV series ever to be made entirely in colour and specifically aimed at the American market. It was the first of the Supermarionation series, I think the third time they used the motorised mouths, but the first of the Supermarionation series whose puppet characters had multiple heads so that you could emphasise the different facial expressions and emotions. The underwater scenes were filmed dry by shooting through a very thin aquarium wall, and it gave the impression of being underwater. It's often regarded by critics as being one of the more mature scripts and storylines because there's obvious parallels with the Cold War and Stingray's battle with the Titans. So Stingray was filmed in Slough, but this was the first time that they used their brand new converted warehouse studio in Stirling Road, having moved from the old Slough trading estate. They had two shooting stages, one for shooting puppets and one for special effects, and that allowed for 2 episodes to be filmed at the same time, which greatly increased their production capabilities. Each show took an average of 11 days filming for the puppets and about 5.5 to 6 days for special effects.
Bones? Bones? Hey, where's Bones? Where is he? Why don't you answer me?
You're wasting your time, Turanian. She cannot speak. None of her race know the luxury of words. She is my slave. And you are my prisoner. Captain Troy Tempest of the World Aquanaut Security Patrol. You and your crew have been found guilty. It is decreed that you are doomed to die. You will be taken to the underwater prison of Alcatraz, where sentence will be carried out.
Oh no, whatever you do, don't send me to Alcatraz. Yeah, they spent a lot of time thinking about that, obviously. So, Stingray, kind of regarded as one of the big three of the Supermarionation. So, Captain Scarlet, Thunderbirds, and Stingray. It's not as ambitious and as technically clever as Thunderbirds, and it's not as dark and kind of sophisticated as Captain Scarlet. So, kind of positioned in the middle. Brilliant entertainment. I highly recommend if you're not a fan or you're not aware of this stuff, check it out. There's lots on YouTube. Grab yourself a beer. It is hugely entertaining. Retrogasmic. We can't do a feature on Gerry and Sylvia Anderson's shows without mentioning the late great Barry Gray. He was a musician and a composer. He had his own orchestra, the Barry Gray Orchestra, and he basically did most of the music for the shows. His style was characterised by lots of brass and percussion. He was a great fan of creating little themes and motifs. So in Thunderbirds, each machine had its own kind of little theme and its own little riff. Joe 90 had his own theme, and the size of the orchestra, I think he had a 40 or 42 piece orchestra, which dwarfed what people would use in normal TV shows. It was real big production stuff, but he worked very, very efficiently, and he wrote and arranged and conducted and produced most of the music himself, so it kept the cost down. A very, very talented guy, and regarded as a great musician. So let's have a listen to a piece of music Barry Gray wrote and produced for the Stingray series. This is a piece called March of the Oysters, which was from the Stingray episode The Secret of the Giant Oyster. And just have a careful listen to this. This stands up on its own against any contemporary piece of classical music. It's astonishing. That brings us to the end of part 1 of our Gerry and Sylvia Anderson special. We'll be back next show and we'll be looking at Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet, and of course Joe 90.
Retrogasmic.
And don't forget, if you're in the market for a handmade, custom designed bowling shirt, hop on over to our show sponsor, rosemary.nz. We'll see you next show.
Retro